What if an ordinary day at the supermarket turned into an unforgettable stand against prejudice? What if a young cashier, quietly enduring daily disrespect, suddenly found himself at the center of a viral moment that exposed both cruelty and kindness? When Matto, a hardworking Latino clerk, faced public humiliation from a hostile customer, no one seemed willing to speak up, until an unexpected voice cut through the tension. But what happens when a Hollywood star steps into a real-life moment of injustice? Does it change everything, or simply highlight the battles many face in silence? Dive into this powerful story of dignity, courage, and the ripple effect one simple act of decency can create in a world that too often looks the other way. Before we continue this story, let us know where you are watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story for you. Matto stood at his register in a bustling supermarket, doing his best to maintain a polite smile as he rang up each customer. Outside the large windows, afternoon light poured in, but inside, artificial lamps illuminated endless rows of groceries. The humming of refrigerators, the squeak of shopping carts, and the soft murmur of chatter merged into a constant, low-level din. The air smelled faintly of freshly ground coffee and oven-warm bread, but Matto had become almost numb to these comforts. His nerves were stretched tight from a morning of impatient customers and pointed stares. At just 23 years old, Matto had learned to weather the subtle judgments that came his way. Born and raised in a modest Latino neighborhood, he carried himself with quiet dignity, aware that some customers treated him like a second-class citizen. Whenever the line grew long, the muttering behind him grew louder. Still, he stayed focused on scanning barcodes and bagging items carefully. He reminded himself he needed this job to pay rent, send some money to his parents, and keep afloat. A few registers down, another clerk joked with a friendly customer. Matto envied that easy rapport, but did not begrudge it. Everyone had a different experience, he told himself. Just keep moving. His forehead glistened with sweat from the strain of keeping up with the relentless flow of customers. Out of habit, his gaze flickered to a security camera mounted near the store's ceiling. For a second, he thought he caught the silhouette of a man standing in the far aisle, someone with a calm demeanor. As if simply observing, Matto couldn't see details, and in an instant, the shape was gone behind a towering display of organic produce. Before he could dwell on it, a sharp clacking of heels punctured the background noise. Into his line stepped a woman who radiated a kind of theatrical arrogance. Her short, platinum blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, accentuating angled cheekbones. Large sunglasses reflected the store's fluorescent lights, obscuring her eyes. Bold letters on her black t-shirt read, "I'm not the boss. I am the queen." Over this, she wore an immaculate white vest. Everything about her screamed, "Notice me." Customers in line shifted, instinctively giving her a bit more space, always exuding impatience. Kara tossed a pointed glance around the queue, exhaling loudly as though the mere act of waiting offended her. She glanced at her watch, huffed, then looked back at Matto with an expression of disdain. As if on cue, she muttered under her breath, "This is taking forever," loud enough to ensure everyone heard. A few people exchanged uneasy looks. Matto's stomach knotted. He could sense the tension swirling in the air like a heavy perfume threatening to spread. He tried to concentrate on the items in front of him, scanning cereal boxes and fruit, placing them gently into paper bags. But Kara clearly wanted an audience. When the customer ahead of her stepped away, it was finally her turn. She set down her groceries with an aggressive push, lips curled into a near sneer. Matto reached for the first item, a bag of potato chips. Perhaps from nerves, the bag slipped from his hand and fell onto the conveyor belt with a crinkling thud. To him, it sounded like a gunshot. Rolling her eyes dramatically, Kara tapped her manicured nails on the counter. "Seriously?" she said, voice dripping with contempt. "You can't even hold a bag of chips?" Heat rose in Matto's cheeks. He forced himself to meet her gaze, though fear pricked at the back of his mind. He'd been trained to stay polite no matter what, to apologize for things that weren't really his fault, to keep the peace. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he managed, carefully picking up the chips to scan them. Kara let out an exaggerated sigh, shifting her purse on her shoulder so forcefully that the contents rattled. "Apologies don't make the line move faster," she snapped. "At least try not to be so clumsy." The person behind her in line fiddled with their phone, possibly considering filming, but not quite daring. Another customer briefly made eye contact with Maddo before looking away. No one said a word to intervene. The store's background noise seemed to dim, and Maddo's heart hammered. Then Kara leaned closer, her voice condescending. "Do you even understand me? Or do I need to speak slower?" she jeered. The store fell even quieter. Maddo felt sweat trickle down the back of his neck. He remembered his father's words. "Keep your head down, stay out of trouble." He inhaled, forcing himself to focus on scanning. But Kara wouldn't let up. She turned to the other customers, raising her voice so they all could hear. "You see what I'm talking about? They hire anybody these days." A hush spread among the onlookers. The humming refrigerators seemed to amplify, filling the silence. Kara glared at Maddo like he was little more than an inconvenience. A speed bump in her day. She was pushing him, testing him. He could feel that intangible line approaching, the one separating quiet acceptance from confrontation. He wanted to speak, to protest, but fear strangled the words in his throat. For now, he remained silent. Yet, out of the corner of his eye, he glimpsed the same man near the organic aisle, a steady presence who seemed to be watching everything intently. Whoever he was, Maddo sensed something about him. Readiness, perhaps. For what? Maddo couldn't say. The tension thickened as Kara tapped her nails on the counter, each tap echoing like a tiny gunshot in the hush that had fallen over the supermarket. Eyes darted toward her, then away. People appeared torn between stepping in or staying silent. Maddo felt a tingling wave of anxiety ripple through him. He bowed his head, scanning the remaining items with care, hoping this ordeal would soon end. But Kara had different intentions. She leaned forward, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Is anyone else seeing how slow this is? I've been standing here for ages." A middle-aged woman in line fiddled with her shopping list. A younger man sipped from a water bottle, eyes darting to the side, unwilling to engage. Despite their apparent discomfort, no one took a stand. A phone rose discreetly above the crowd, its camera capturing the unfolding confrontation. Kara noticed, flipping her hair with a smug chuckle, as if confident she was in the right. Maddo swallowed hard, scanning the last of Kara's groceries. He tried to hand her the receipt, but she let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Wow, you got that done without dropping anything." "Miracles happen," she sneered. She snatched the receipt, and Maddo was about to slide her items toward the bagging area when he accidentally brushed her handbag. Instantly, Kara recoiled. "Watch it," she barked, pulling her purse away as though he might contaminate it. A few scattered gasps sounded from onlookers. "I'm sorry," Maddo said automatically, though he'd done nothing wrong. His voice shook slightly. Kara stepped back a fraction and, with theatrical drama, exhaled her frustration. "What a joke. You come into this country and take jobs, yet you can't even get simple tasks right." Her voice had taken on an edge now, one tinted with xenophobia. The hush in the supermarket transformed into an uncomfortable weight pressing on everyone's shoulders. You could see the flicker of alarm in some customers' eyes, but it still wasn't enough to make them step forward. A handful of them slowly lifted their phones, capturing the moment. The fluorescent lights above hummed, illuminating the cruelty in Kara's smirk. Maddo's stomach twisted. He'd heard variations of these remarks before, though rarely so blatantly. People around him often made subtle digs about where he came from, but they seldom yelled it for all to hear. Anger flared beneath his fear. He'd been taught to keep his head down, but at that moment, he felt an urge to say something, anything to push back. Before he could muster the courage, Kara's outburst escalated. "I'm done with this nonsense. Where's the manager?" she demanded, spinning around to address the entire store. "Is anybody in charge here?" Because clearly, This kid can't handle a register. A manager in a crisp, white shirt peeked from behind a display stand. Hesitation etched on his features. He looked as though he was deciding whether to intervene or not. The scene was so charged that it seemed to hold him in place. Matto's chest tightened. He expected the manager to come over, to defuse the situation, but the man remained frozen. Meanwhile, Kara turned back to Matto, voice dripping with disdain. You know what? Just stay quiet. You barely speak English as it is. Those words sparked a furious ache in Matto's gut. He'd heard that insult too many times, backhanded comments from strangers, or condescending remarks disguised as jokes. The humiliation of it burned, pushing him closer to a boundary he had never crossed. Suddenly, from somewhere behind the line, a calm voice spoke up. That's enough. It wasn't loud, yet it cut through Kara's tirade. Heads turned, and cameras swung to capture who had spoken. Standing not far from the register was a man in a simple black t-shirt and worn denim jacket. He stepped forward slowly, hands at his sides, posture relaxed but unmistakably firm. Mata recognized him now. Anyone with a television or internet connection would. It was Keanu Reeves. A collective gasp rippled through the store. Some onlookers blinked, disbelieving. But there was no doubt. The actor's face was instantly recognizable. He didn't appear boastful or dramatic. If anything, he looked quietly resolute, with calm eyes that had clearly been watching the scene unfold. Kara took a step back, her bravado wavering. Who? She began. But of course, she knew who he was. Her shock manifested as a flush creeping into her cheeks. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. The camera zoomed in on Keanu, capturing the tension on Kara's face. Mato soto emociones, scanning the actor's calm expression as if trying to decipher a coded message. Keanu's gaze flickered to Matto, then back to Kara. No one should speak to another person that way, he said quietly. Although his tone was measured, his words carried unmistakable weight. A tide of relief washed over Matto, though he simultaneously worried that Kara would lash out even more explosively. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The crowd stirred, an undercurrent of curiosity and apprehension. A braver soul might have expected Kara to back down immediately, but she forced a tight laugh. Excuse me? I can speak my mind. Last time I checked, that was allowed. Keanu tilted his head slightly. Speaking your mind doesn't give you the right to degrade someone, he returned, voice calm. Especially someone who's just doing his job. For a moment, Kara seemed unsure how to respond. Cameras kept rolling, capturing every second. She let out a shaky breath, her eyes flitting between Keanu and Matto, as if deciding which of them deserved her ire more. For all her bluster, she found herself faced with a moral mirror she couldn't avoid. A hush fell once again, but this time it was thick with the possibility of real change. No longer was it a private altercation. It had become a public reckoning, one that might echo far beyond the supermarket's walls. For a few suspended heartbeats, no one spoke. Every gaze flicked between Keanu Reeves, Kara, and Matto. Cell phones were raised high, capturing an unexpected clash between a Hollywood star and a hostile customer. Kara recovered her composure in a burst of indignation. She squared her shoulders, tossed her hair back, and lifted her chin. How dare you barge into a private conversation, she snapped, though her voice wavered. You don't get to tell me how to speak. Are you some hero now? Keanu's expression remained neutral, eyes steady on Kara. He didn't raise his voice. I'm not a hero, just someone who saw enough. That simple statement seemed to hang in the air, underscoring the weight of all the unspoken moments in which everyday cruelty goes unchecked. Slowly, some customers began murmuring their support under their breath. Others simply watched. Transfixed, Matto felt his chest tighten with conflicting emotions. Relief, fear, gratitude, and a growing sense of validation swirled inside him. All his life, he'd shouldered disrespect in silence. Now, having someone, particularly someone famous, speak up felt surreal. At the same time, he was bracing himself for Kara's next move. She aimed an accusatory finger at him. This is the problem. You see, People like him can't do the job right. And now I'm the villain? This is insane. Her frustration spiked, voice cracking at the end. A flush of color surfaced in her cheeks. Perhaps from embarrassment, perhaps from lingering anger. A few bold souls in the crowd started shaking their heads. One elderly man clutched his shopping cart and said softly, "That's enough, ma'am." Others nodded, quietly affirming that her behavior had crossed a line. The store manager, finally deciding he had to do something, emerged from behind the aisle. He cleared his throat, looking from Kara to Keanu. Is everything all right here?" His question hung in the air, pathetically insufficient for the tension in the room. Before Kara could answer, Keanu turned slightly, addressing the manager. "Your employee deserves respect. I think we can all agree on that." A short nod was the manager's reply, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Kara was not done. "I have the right to complain if the service is terrible," she insisted, voice ricocheting off the shelves. "I've been waiting, and this incompetent." She caught herself before finishing that sentence, sensing how the tide of public opinion was shifting. She swallowed hard. For a moment, Keanu's gaze flicked to the phones filming him and back to Kara. He stepped forward, placing himself in front of Maddo's checkout stand. "You can always express concerns," he said softly, "but there's no need to demean someone. There's a difference between pointing out an issue and attacking a person's dignity." A hush covered the onlookers once more. This time, the silence felt full of collective guilt, as if many realized they, too, had stood by in other situations, letting harshness pass unchallenged. Kara, however, maintained her glare. Her pride was bruised, and she seemed unwilling to back down in front of a rolling camera. She folded her arms, nostrils flaring. "Well, maybe you think you can educate me on manners," she said sarcastically, "but this is my country. I can talk however I want. If people can't handle it, they should go somewhere else." An audible gasp passed through the store. Her words were inflammatory, direct, and pointed once again at Maddo's presumed origins. Mouth dry, Maddo clenched the edge of the counter. A conflict raged inside him. Keep quiet and safe. Or finally speak up. Before he could decide, Keanu inhaled, then met Kara's stare. "You sound angry," he observed, voice still even. "But anger doesn't give you the right to trample on somebody else's worth. This country's bigger than any of us, and it belongs to all of us who respect one another." The hush intensified, customers absorbing the weight of those words. A few hands holding phones began trembling. They realized they were capturing a profound moment. Kara's bravado flickered. She blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing with no immediate retort. Nearby, a woman who had been silent the entire time cleared her throat. "He's right," she said, aiming a gentle smile at Maddo. He said to Kara, voice shaking slightly, "I'm going to ask you to lower your tone. If you have a complaint, I can help. But we can't allow harassment of our employees or other customers." Glancing around, Kara noticed the stares now came with condemnation. She seemed to gauge her limited options. Her lips curled into a disdainful sneer. "Fine. He's not worth any more of my time anyway," she muttered, stepping away from the checkout. Her abrupt pivot almost collided her with another shopper, who quickly moved aside. As she turned, she nearly brushed past Keanu. The cameras caught her pursed lips, the frustration in her eyes. For a split second, it looked like she might hurl another insult. But she simply tossed her hair in defiance and stalked off, pushing her cart away from Maddo's line. A collective exhale rippled across the crowd. The show of hostility had ended, at least for now. People watched Kara stride toward the exit, shoulders tense, her pride evidently wounded. One by one, phones lowered. Their owners realized they'd just witnessed a small but significant stand against everyday prejudice. Keanu didn't revel in victory. Instead, he glanced at Maddo, who looked slightly stunned. Their eyes met, and in that instant, gratitude coursed through Maddo. He wanted to say something, but words escaped him. Eventually, Keanu walked closer, offering a reassuring smile. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Maddo nodded, though his throat felt tight. Why, yeah, he managed, blinking hard as though waking from a surreal dream. He thanked Keanu under his breath, uncertain if the star could hear him over the store's ambient noise. But the soft nod Keanu gave in return suggested he understood perfectly. The entire ordeal lasted only minutes, but news of it spread like wildfire. By the time the store manager awkwardly tried to resume normal operations, the videos had already been uploaded to multiple social media platforms. Different angles showed the same confrontation: Kara's hateful remarks, Matto's tense silence, and Keanu Reeves calmly intervening. Viewers worldwide quickly took notice. It wasn't every day that one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood appeared in such an unscripted moment. The hashtag #StandWithMatto began circulating, collecting thousands of comments. Some were from people describing their own experiences with workplace discrimination. Others were praising Keanu for speaking up when no one else would. At home that evening, Matto sat on the edge of his small bed, phone buzzing incessantly. He had dozens of missed calls, text messages, and notifications from every social app he'd ever downloaded. He hadn't asked for any of this attention. He never wanted to be a public figure. Yet, the entire internet seemed to know his name. His mother called, her voice thick with concern and pride. She spoke in Spanish, asking him what had happened, if he was safe, and why famous people were suddenly contacting him. Matto did his best to reassure her, though he had little clarity himself. He was rattled, yet strangely uplifted. After so many years of swallowing insults, of tolerating bigotry for the sake of survival, an unexpected ally had emerged, and it changed everything. Meanwhile, Kara's life took a different turn. The footage of her insulting Matto, followed by Keanu's calm rebuke, had made her a pariah on social media. Everywhere she turned, she saw her own angry face plastered in viral videos. Comment sections tore into her behavior, calling her out for racism, entitlement, and cruelty. Brands she publicly liked or followed quickly distanced themselves. A few netizens identified her workplace, bombarding it with complaints. She found herself on the defensive, unprepared for the avalanche of backlash. The next morning, Matto returned to the supermarket as usual, unsure what to expect. Would the store management blame him for the negative publicity or support him? However, as soon as he walked in, a round of spontaneous applause broke out among a few coworkers. Others offered him a discreet thumbs up. Someone had taped a small printed sign near his register that read, "Proud of you." He felt the sting of tears at the corners of his eyes. A customer approached, an older man carrying just a loaf of bread. After Matto rang him up, the man placed a gentle hand on Matto's shoulder. "Thank you for staying strong," he said quietly. "You've reminded us to treat each other better." Matto, taken aback, could only manage a grateful nod. The day sped by in a surreal blur of supportive comments and quieter lines. Kara did not appear. In her absence, the supermarket felt lighter, as if the tension she exuded had been lifted. Yet Matto knew all too well that discrimination wasn't limited to one person. It lingered in subtle glances and whispered jokes. Still, the difference was that now, more people seemed ready to challenge it. Sometime around midday, the store's assistant manager approached Matto, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "There's someone here to see you," he said. Matto's heart skipped a beat. Had Kara returned, determined to finish what she started? But when Matto stepped into the employee lounge, he found himself face-to-face with Keanu Reeves again. This time, the atmosphere was calm, and only a couple of the store's staff hovered nearby, too stunned to speak. Keanu's expression was warm, a faint smile touching his lips. "Hey," he greeted, as though they were casual acquaintances. Matto swallowed the lump in his throat. "Hi," he managed, voice wavering. Keanu gestured to a couple of chairs against the wall, and they sat. One of the employees quickly offered them bottled water, then darted away, giving them some space. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the hum of customers and PA announcements formed a muted backdrop. Finally, Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I'm sorry you went through that yesterday," he said, sincerity coloring each word. I've seen this kind of thing happen too often, and it never gets easier. Maddo nodded, unsure how to respond. He was struck by the genuineness in Keanu's eyes. Thank you for stepping in, he managed. I wasn't expecting help. Keanu gave a thoughtful shrug. I don't think you should have to expect it. It's just the right thing to do. He took a beat, then continued. I want to check on you. Make sure you're holding up. A lot has happened in a short time. For the next few minutes, they talked about the sudden surge of attention, the positivity and negativity swirling online, and the stress all of it brought. Maddo admitted he felt torn. He appreciated the support, but also felt exposed. Keanu listened carefully, offering neither empty platitudes nor advice, just empathy. When they stood to leave, Keanu extended a hand. Maddo shook it, finding comfort in the actor's firm grip. If you ever need anything, let me know, Keanu said softly, patting Maddo's shoulder. Then, with minimal fuss, he left through a side door, accompanied by a light hush of awe among the employees who had witnessed the encounter. Maddo returned to his register with a renewed sense of self-worth. He realized that while prejudice hadn't magically vanished, he was no longer the same. He carried a sense of empowerment, one that comes from being seen and defended. And in that knowledge, he found a quieter, more enduring form of strength. In the days that followed, the supermarket became an unlikely center of media attention. Journalists and curious visitors showed up, searching for the Latino worker who Keanu Reeves defended. The store manager, faced with an onslaught of requests, tried to shield Maddo from intrusive interviews. Though Maddo's newfound fame felt overwhelming, he tried to maintain his routine, arriving on time, greeting customers politely, and scanning items with diligent focus. Behind the scenes, social media continued to churn. The video of Kara's tirade and Keanu's intervention racked up millions of views. Comments poured in from every corner of the globe. A hashtag campaign started, advocating for better workplace protections and urging bystanders to step up against everyday discrimination. It was far from the first time the internet had rallied around an incident of prejudice. But something about this story, maybe Keanu's calm demeanor or Maddo's humility, captured hearts in a special way. As for Kara, her life took a sharp nosedive. Former friends avoided her. Workplaces reconsidered her presence, and she found herself labeled as a cautionary tale for over-the-top entitlement. In public, people recognized her from the video and stared coldly, sometimes recording her on their phones. The humiliation she had once so easily inflicted on others had become her daily burden. For the first time, she experienced a taste of the isolation that prejudice can create. One afternoon, she ventured back into the supermarket, hoping to move on as if nothing had happened. The moment she walked in, a hush fell over the store. Some recognized her instantly, whispering among themselves. She marched to a different register this time, chin lifted high, as though unbothered. But the weight of those stares pressed on her shoulders. She placed her items down, face flushed, and avoided eye contact. This new cashier bagged her groceries in tense silence. No one tried to provoke her. If anything, they were carefully distant. Kara felt the heat of judgment from every direction. She paid quickly and hurried out, noticing how little it took for the entire store to feel suffocating. Without a word, she disappeared into the parking lot, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. Meanwhile, Maddo was on the next register over, serving a line of customers. He had spotted Kara in his peripheral vision, but she never turned his way. A flood of conflicting emotions coursed through him. He remembered the sting of her insults, yet he also recognized something akin to pity for her now. By the time he finished bagging his current customers' groceries, Kara was gone. That evening, Maddo found himself scrolling through messages on social media. He stumbled upon a direct message from Keanu Reeves, a short note, words of encouragement that made Maddo's chest tighten with gratitude. He typed a reply, expressing how much the support meant to him, and set down his phone. He had grown used to a world where rudeness and bias were simply background noise. Now he understood that speaking up, or having someone speak up for you, could create a ripple effect. prompting others to reconsider their silence. The supermarket, too, changed in small but meaningful ways. The manager organized a brief meeting, urging he had discovered a powerful truth. Kindness can break through. It only takes one person willing to stand up, to say enough, and to show others what's possible. He couldn't help thinking about Kara, wondering if she would learn from the public backlash or remain trapped in bitterness. He also thought of Keanu, a superstar who could have done nothing yet chose to intervene with quiet resolve. Maddow felt a surge of determination. Perhaps, when the time was right, he would pay that kindness forward, whether it involved defending a coworker, reassuring a scared child, or simply offering a compassionate word to a stranger. That same afternoon, he walked home to his modest apartment building, each step echoing with a new sense of purpose. As he passed his neighbor, an elderly woman struggling with groceries, Maddow offered to help carry her bags upstairs. She accepted with a surprised smile, and as they made their way to her door, he understood that small acts of decency were at the heart of any real change. The tumultuous events in the supermarket demonstrated that prejudice can surface in the most mundane settings. A single checkout lane can become a battlefield for dignity. Maddow's quiet endurance, Kara's aggressive entitlement, and Keanu's decisive intervention combined to show how swiftly hate can spread and how powerfully it can be challenged. Many people saw themselves in Maddow, remembering instances where hurtful words went unchallenged. Others identified with the onlookers who froze, unsure whether they should intervene. And a great many recognized Kara's attitude, whether in themselves or in someone they knew, a potent reminder that intolerance often hides in plain sight. Yet, it was Keanu's calm resolve that illuminated a simple truth. Decency matters in every setting, big or small. His defense of Maddow signaled that each of us holds the power to disrupt cruelty, even if only with a gentle, "That's enough." We don't have to be famous to stand against prejudice. We just need the courage to act when it's easiest to look away. From that moment forward, Maddow carried a renewed sense of worth, aware that no insult could truly define him. For Kara, a painful lesson offered a chance at reflection, and for the shoppers who witnessed it all, daily life in the supermarket was transformed into a powerful example of empathy in action. Ultimately, the story reminds us that every day presents an opportunity to choose respect over ridicule. When the next confrontation arises, on a crowded street, at a busy cafe, or in a humble grocery store, anyone can speak up, and if enough of us do, perhaps the quiet cruelty of ordinary discrimination will have far fewer places to hide.